They say childhood shapes you, but what if it breaks you first? I was 10 when the world split open. My father gone in a flash, my mother gone by choice. I became the silence in a house once full of laughter. This is the story of what was lost, what was rebuilt, and how I learned to stay. Before everything cracked open, my world was a modest 2-story house with red shutters, and a lawn Dad swore he'd reseed every spring but never quite did. I was 10, freckled and small for my age, but loud enough to make up for it. Mornings meant the smell of burnt toast and Dad yelling at the television during sports highlights, always too animated for that early hour. The man was born loud, Mom used to say with a laugh, brushing flour off her apron. I remember those days like snapshots, Dad chasing me and my little sister Emily across the backyard with a soccer ball, his voice echoing, "Come on, Dan the man, show me that left foot." We didn't have much, but everything felt full of noise, full of life, full of him. Dad was the son of our household. He didn't just brighten rooms, he heated them, made them feel lived in. Mom, Miriam, was different. Quieter, elegant in a fragile kind of way, like she was made from blown glass and just one hard word could shatter her. But she laughed when Dad laughed, and when he hugged her from behind at the sink and whispered something I wasn't meant to hear, her smile could light a second sun. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the world titled. The memory of it comes like a knife slipping through a bag of flour, sudden, messy, and choking. One moment, I was doing math homework on the living room rug, trying to figure out decimals. The next, Aunt Jane was bursting through the front door like a storm cloud with mascara. She didn't say it at first, just collapsed into Mom's arms and sobbed like a child. I remember staring at the way her shoes squeaked on the hardwood, confused, not scared yet. Then Mom gasped. No, not a gasp, a strangled sound, like her lungs had folded. No, she said, over and over, like if she repeated it enough it would undo time. I stood up, heart thudding, and looked at Jane, who couldn't meet my eyes. What happened? I asked, no answer. Where's Dad's silence? And then finally, through broken teeth, Jane said the words that carved a ditch through my childhood. There was an accident, Daniel, your dad, he didn't make it. I didn't cry at first. I didn't feel it first. I stood there, arms limp at my sides, thinking maybe they were wrong. Maybe he'd burst through the door, late from work, cursing traffic and hugging us all too tight. But he didn't. The days that followed were strange, soft things, like someone had turned the world's volume down to a dull hum. The house got quiet in a way that made every sound unnatural. The ticking clock was too loud, the refrigerator's hum unbearable. I slept in his shirts, clung to them like a lifeline, and even imagined once that the smell of him in the fabric meant he was still around. Mom stopped cooking. The kitchen stayed dark. She'd sit on the couch staring at nothing while Emily and I tiptoed around her like she might shatter if we breathed wrong. I remember walking into the living room one night and finding her whispering to the arm of Dad's recliner, her hands gripping the sides like she could will him back into the cushions. She forgot to pack Emily's lunch for school 2 days in a row. I started doing it, scared the teachers would call social services. She burned dinner once and didn't even notice. I scraped the blackened pasta into the trash and told Emily it was a new recipe called volcano noodles. She laughed briefly, then cried into her plate. I don't know exactly when I started to feel like I was holding up the ceiling. Maybe the night I walked past her door and heard her sobbing, choking out, "I can't do this," over and over. I wanted to crawl into her bed and tell her we'd be okay, but I also hated her in that moment for being so small when we needed her to be big. And then came the voices, relatives arguing in the hallway, whispering behind closed doors that didn't stay shut long enough. I crouched outside Mom's room once, listening. "You have responsibilities, Miriam," Aunt June snapped. "You can't just fall apart, you have kids." Mom's voice was low, raw. "I need to breathe, June. Every minute in this house I'm drowning. So you'll leave, that's your answer, dump them like lost luggage. You don't understand, I can't, he's in every wall, every shadow. They need you more than your grief does." But Mom didn't respond. I waited for her to say something, anything, but all I heard was silence and the sound of her zipping a suitcase. She told us the next morning. Sat us down at the kitchen table, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Emily clutched my hand under the table, sensing the shift in the air. "I need to go away for a little while," she said, her voice forced calm like she was reciting a script she barely believed in. "Just some time to think, to heal, I'll be back before the snow melts." "But who tucks me in until then?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could cage them. She flinched, then reached for me, but I pulled away. "I need you to be strong, Daniel," she whispered. "For Emily, for me." I remember thinking, I'm 10, I'm a kid, I don't want to be strong, but I didn't say it. Emily started crying quietly, no tantrum, just that hollow kind of sob kids do when they don't know how to stop their world from ending. I stared at Mom, searching for something, remorse, hesitation, anything, but all I saw was exhaustion and the cruel relief of escape. She left the next afternoon. I watched from the window, cheek pressed against the cold glass. She didn't look back, not once. Scud into Uncle Harold's car, her suitcase bumping into the curb as she climbed in and drove off like the house behind her was empty. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stood there until my breath fogged the glass so thick I couldn't see the street anymore. And maybe it was better that way. That night I made Emily a sandwich with stale bread and let her sleep in my bed. She clutched my arm like a lifeline and whispered, "She'll come back, right?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because something deep in my chest told me would just become a story she'd tell other people later. About how she used to have kids, once, before life got too heavy to carry. And in that moment, lying beside my sister in a house that suddenly felt haunted, I realized I wasn't a kid anymore. I was a memory waiting to fade. The Nelson's house had blue shutters and smelled like cinnamon, which should have been comforting, but instead felt like wearing someone else's sweater, warm, sure, but not yours. Mrs. Nelson was kind in a soft-spoken, floral-apron way, always making tea, always calling us sweetheart like it was a reflex. Mr. Nelson was tall and polite, the kind of man who cleared his throat before speaking and smiled like it cost him something. They were decent people, but they weren't my parents. Not even close. When Emily and I moved in, we were handed new toothbrushes, folded towels on unfamiliar beds, and a new set of house rules taped to the fridge. Breakfast by 7, homework before TV, and Sunday is board game night. Mrs. Nelson chirped like she was offering us a gift. I just stared at the list and thought about how at our house, the only rule was, don't let mom burn the toast again. Now, Emily and I shared a small guest bedroom where the bed creaked every time one of us rolled over. She snored lightly, something I hadn't noticed when we'd had separate rooms. I started sleeping with my headphones in just to block out the unfamiliarity. The first few nights were the worst. I'd lie awake and listen to Mrs. Nelson's soft humming from the kitchen downstairs, and wonder if mom was still humming to herself too, somewhere, or if silence had swallowed her whole. Emily adjusted faster than I did. She started calling Mrs. Nelson Aunt Carol within a week, helped her bake banana bread, even laughed once when Mr. Nelson did a stupid magic trick with a coin. She clung to their routines like a safety net, refusing to look down. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I got too comfortable, it meant I was letting go of something important, like Dad's voice, or the way Mom used to brush my hair with her fingers instead of a comb. I kept picturing her walking away from the house, not even looking back. It kept replaying like a tape in my head, especially when the Nelsons tried too hard. "How are we doing today?" Mrs. Nelson asked once with that tilted head smile. I wanted to scream. There was no we. There was just me, floating through someone else's life like a ghost squatting in their hallway. The guilt hit hardest at night. I'd run through every fight I'd had with Mom, every slammed door, every eye roll, every time I'd muttered something cruel because I thought I was too old to need her kisses. I began to believe that maybe I broke her. Maybe if I'd been a better kid, she would have stayed. That thought became a rod in my chest, one I couldn't rip out. And yet, I couldn't say it out loud. I didn't even tell Emily. She was trying so hard to seem normal, doing her homework, brushing her teeth without reminders, offering to help with dinner like a kid in a TV show. When I asked her once, "Do you miss Mom?" she just nodded and went back to coloring. That was her way, keep the crayons moving, keep the silence from screaming. School was a different battlefield. Our new school smelled like bleach and uncertainty, and the kids there looked at us like we were foreign exchange students from a war zone. I kept my head down, avoided eye contact, didn't correct the teacher when she mispronounced our last name. Then came roll call. "Daniel," the teacher paused. "Is it McRae?" "Yeah," I said. She smiled. "Parents' contact info." I hesitated, then muttered, "It's in the office." She raised a brow but didn't push. What was I supposed to say? My mom bailaid my dad's dead, and I live with cinnamon-scented strangers. No thanks. That day, I ate lunch in the library and told a librarian I had a sore throat so she wouldn't ask why I wasn't talking. One night, maybe 2 weeks in, I woke up from a dream where Dad had come back and was fixing the squeaky garage door. He winked at me and said, "Hold the ladder, damn the man." I woke up crying into my pillow, nose clogged and throat raw. I tried to muffle it, but the door creaked open and Mrs. Nelson stepped in, her robe dragging on the carpet. "Daniel," she said, crouching by my bed. I wiped my face and turned away. "I'm fine," I lied. She sat down beside me anyway, ignoring the lie like she'd heard it before. "You are not hard to love," she said softly. That sentence hit me like a punch. I hadn't realized until then that I thought I was. That maybe Mom left because something in me made her want to run. I didn't respond, but I didn't pull away either. The letter came a week later. It was folded neatly, no return address, just to Daniel and Emily in Mom's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, just a few sentences. "I miss you both terribly. I think of you every day. I'm trying to get better. Love, Mom." That was it. No apology. No "I'm sorry I left without kissing you goodbye." Just the same hollow words that echoed like someone shouting into a tunnel. I showed it to Emily, who read it and smiled like it meant something. "See, she's coming back." I didn't have the heart to tell her that words on paper didn't mean a thing without action. I wrote back, twice, short letters. Updates about school, Emily, the Nelsons. The third time I stopped. What was I even saying? And why was I trying to stay connected to someone who'd walked out of our lives like she was changing the channel on a bad show? When my birthday rolled around, the Nelsons threw a party. Cake, balloons, even a happy 11th Daniel banner in the kitchen. Few neighbor kids I didn't know showed up with gift cards and generic smiles. Mr. Nelson tried to recreate one of my old birthdays. He found a photo of Dad holding me up so I could blow out candles, and he tried to hold me the same way. I let him. I didn't want to embarrass him. But afterward, while everyone was distracted with ice cream, I slipped under the table and just sat there, my knees pulled to my chest, trying not to sob loud enough for anyone to hear. The worst part. I couldn't remember Dad's laugh anymore. Not exactly, just the echo of it. That night, as Mrs. Nelson picked up streamers and Mr. Nelson hummed off-key while washing dishes, I went into the laundry room, found an old phone book, and started looking up names. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe Miriam had left a trail. Maybe I wanted to call and scream at her. Or maybe I just wanted her to answer for what she did, to tell me that I hadn't imagined all the warmth we used to have. That she used to love us and not just the idea of us. But I never found her name. And maybe that was the answer. As I shut the book and turned off the light, something hardened in me, a layer of resolve I hadn't known was forming. The kind that doesn't shatter easily. And I realized, in that quiet, fluorescent-lit laundry room, that if I wanted to survive this, I'd have to stop waiting for her shadow at the door. Because she wasn't coming back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She walked in like she hadn't missed a decade. The front door creaked open and there she stood, Miriam, my mother, holding a leather purse that looked more expensive than anything in our entire house, and wearing a perfume that made the air in the room feel artificial. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, stylish and sharp, like she traded motherhood for manicures and some therapist's half-healed guilt. I was 16 then, tall enough to look her in the eyes, old enough to remember every detail she thought time might have softened. Emily froze by the stairs, her face flickering between shock and joy like she couldn't decide whether to run into her arms or run upstairs and slam the door. Mrs. Nelson, ever the hostess, ushered her in with a forced smile and a tray of lemon cookies, and I stood there, arms crossed, feeling like a stranger in a reunion meant for someone else. "Daniel," she said, her voice somehow too calm, too pleasant, like she was greeting a waiter who'd gotten her order wrong. I didn't answer, just stared. She stepped forward. "You've grown so much." "People tend to do that," I said, sharper than I meant, but not sharp enough to cut through everything I felt. She blinked, then smiled again, a little more fragile this time. She spent the first 10 minutes complimenting the Nelsons' furniture, asking about the weather, pretending this was some casual visit and not her first time stepping into our lives in nearly 6 years. Emily finally broke the awkward spell by hugging her, tearful but hesitant, and I could almost see Mom's body melt as she held her. "I missed you so much," she whispered into Emily's hair. I scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. Mom turned toward me. "Daniel, please, I'm here now." "Yeah. For how long this time? A week, a weekend? Until whatever retreat or spa you escaped to kicks you out." Mr. Nelson cleared his throat, trying to reset the tone. "Let's sit. We made a nice dinner." Nice was generous. It was meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the Nelsons' version of comfort food, and we all sat around the table like we didn't know who the ghost was at the end of it. Mom brought gifts, shiny, overcompensating things. A sleek new tablet for Emily. A watch for me, boxed in velvet. I didn't open it. "You trying to buy your way back in?" I muttered. "It's just something I thought you'd like," she said gently. "You don't know what I like." "Daniel," Mrs. Nelson warned, tone soft but edged. "Let's keep it civil." Why, she wasn't civil when she vanished. Dinner continued in awkward chew and swallow silence, broken only by Mr. Nelson's desperate attempts at conversation. "You know, time's a funny thing. It changes people. Sometimes it heals if we let it." Mom nodded like she was in some therapy session. "That's exactly right. I've changed, Daniel. I've done the work." "What does that even mean?" I said, pushing my food around my plate. "You read a book on guilt and thought you could just show up and would clap." Emily looked down at her lap, her hand twitching like she wanted to hold mine but didn't dare. After dinner, she cornered me in the hallway. "Can't you just try?" she asked, voice small. "Try what?" "Try not hating her so loudly." "I don't hate her," I snapped. "I just remember." Later that night, she asked me to go for a walk, just the two of us. "We used to walk together," she said, like that would trigger some golden memory. I stared at her deadpan. "We also used to have a mother." She winced but didn't argue. "Please, Daniel, just a short walk." I declined. Not even because I was angry, though I was, but because I didn't trust her not to vanish halfway through. She settled for sitting beside me on the porch, wrapped in her expensive shawl like she was cold from something deeper than weather. "I never stopped thinking about you," she said, voice nearly cracking. "You stopped being my mother the day you packed your suitcase," I answered. That shut her up. Her lips pressed tight and for once she didn't reach for a defense. "Did you ever look back?" I asked suddenly. "Even once, from the car?" Her eyes filled, but I kept my stare. "No," she whispered. "I couldn't." "You couldn't or you would." She didn't answer and I didn't press. The silence between us said everything. That night I found an old letter in my desk drawer, one I'd written years ago but never mailed. It was just a kid's scrawl, crooked lines full of hope and confusion. "I miss you." Emily cried again. "I don't know how to fix things. Please come back. Please be Mom again." I crumpled it in my hand and shoved it into my backpack. Maybe I'd burn it later. Maybe I wouldn't. The next day she tried again. Let me take you somewhere, just us, a movie or lunch or, I've got school, I said, not looking up from my cereal. I could come back after we could. Don't what? Don't act like this is some normal day, it's not. Emily reached over and gently touched her arm. I'll go, she said, and so they did, and I didn't. She left the next afternoon, a tight hug for Emily, a long look at me that I didn't return. I'll be back soon, she said. I didn't respond, just walked past her and into the garage, where Dad's old toolbox still sat in the corner under a sheet of dust. I yanked it open, grabbed a rusted wrench, and sat on the concrete floor with it in my lap. The cold metal felt grounding. I don't know why I cried then. Maybe because I'd held it together too long. Maybe because part of me still hoped she'd stay, even though I knew better. I cried quietly, rocking slightly, gripping that wrench like it could hold me back together. And all I could think about was how loud the silence was now, that she was gone again. She was late to class the first time I saw her, and still managed to make it look like it was the professor's fault. The door creaked open mid-lecture and in she walked. Alyssa Monroe, with her black turtleneck, dark jeans, and that expression like she'd already read the textbook and found it lacking. She didn't apologize. Just slid into the seat 2 rows ahead of me and started typing like she was writing her thesis on war crimes. Her eyes met once. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow, not flirtatious, more like, what do you want? I looked away, then looked back when she smirked. After class, we ended up walking in the same direction and struck up conversation, mostly by accident. She made a joke about the professor's obsession with post-structuralism. I countered with a jab about her storming in like she owned the place. Confidence isn't a crime, she replied. And you're not nearly as quiet as you pretend to be. She said it without looking at me, already pulling a cold brew from her bag like it was a prop in some script she'd been rehearsing. She was sharp, funny, clearly smarter than me, and I should have felt intimidated. But instead, I felt something click, like a door opening somewhere I didn't know I had. Over the next few weeks, we kept finding each other in the same coffee shops, study halls, libraries. Not by accident. She liked schedules. I liked patterns. We became an unofficial team, trading notes, laughing over bad group projects, arguing over existentialist philosophers like it mattered. I was used to keeping people at arm's length, but Alyssa didn't let me hide behind silence. She poked. She prodded. She'd throw out comments like, you act like someone taught you how to disappear, or you don't flinch at other people's pain, why do you flinch at your own? I brushed it off at first. Kept things surface level. She told me about her major in political science, her love of debates, her childhood obsession with court shows. I told her about my part-time job at the bookstore and let her assume I had a normal family, a normal past, normal scars. I figured if I said too much, she'd run. I didn't realize she had her own reasons not to. Our first date was awkward as hell. I picked a cheap Thai place near campus because it felt low pressure. She showed up in a blazer, which threw me off completely, and ordered like she knew the chef. We spent the first 10 minutes talking about the weird guy who always fell asleep in lecture, and the second 10 arguing about whether Nietzsche was overrated. Somewhere between spring rolls and pad thai, I told a stupid joke about nihilism and she choked on her drink. I thought she'd leave. Instead, she leaned in and said, "You're weirder than I thought, that's a compliment." Walked her back to her dorm and we stood outside awkwardly for a minute before she said, "You don't have to pretend you're okay all the time." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. The truth finally came out on a Tuesday evening on a hill behind the campus library. We were watching the sunset, legs stretched out in opposite directions, arms brushing occasionally when one of us moved. It was quiet for a while, then she said, "You never talk about your parents." I shrugged. "Not much to say. You're full of shit." I laughed, even though she wasn't smiling. I looked at the sky and exhaled like maybe the clouds could carry the weight for me. My dad died when I was 10. Heart attack, sudden, brutal. My mom left a year later, said she needed space. Never really came back. I was raised by people who meant well but weren't mine. That enough honesty for you? She didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "Thank you." Then she told me about her own quiet abandonment, the grandparents who raised her and then died when she was still too young to manage her own loneliness. "I used to pretend I was in a sitcom," she said, made up laugh tracks in my head to keep from crying during dinner. I didn't know whether to laugh or hug her, so I did neither. We just sat in silence again, but this time it was full, heavy, comfortable. After that, things changed. We weren't just flirting anymore. We were building something brick by jagged brick. I met her friends, who called her the commander behind her back because she was terrifying in debates and once made a TA cry. She met mine, what few I had, and charmed them in minutes. She started calling me out when I deflected, and I started learning how to stay when things got hard. One day she brought me to her apartment uptown, sleek, modern, filled with things that didn't match her age. Her parents were loaded, apparently. The apartment was a gift for getting into her honors program. "Doesn't feel like mine," she said, taking off her heels. "Just a fancy cage with better lighting." I felt wildly out of place. My shoes left dirt on her polished floors and I kept staring at the espresso machine like it might bite. "You're twitching," she said, smirking. "It's just a lot. You're allowed to be overwhelmed. I don't date people for their comfort with cappuccino machines." I told her then, halfway between awkward laughter and brutal honesty, I didn't fall for your polish, Alyssa. I fell for the way you asked about my pain without flinching. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, love isn't about fixing Daniel, it's about staying even when the cracks show. And that was the moment I knew. She wasn't just someone I liked. She was someone who saw me in a way no one else had dared to, not as a broken project, not as someone who needed saving. Someone who could build something new from everything that had collapsed. That night we didn't kiss. We just sat on the floor, eating leftover pasta with our hands and talking about the people we used to be. The next morning I get a message from Miriam. No subject line, just a single sentence, I'm in town next week. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time before locking my phone and walking into Alyssa's room. She looked up, saw my face and asked, storm cloud or tidal wave? I smiled faintly, bit of both. She poured me coffee and didn't ask anything more. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. When I proposed to Alyssa, it wasn't over candlelight or on some rooftop with a hidden photographer. It was in our kitchen, barefoot and hungover from a friend's party, with her hair twisted up and my heart beating like a war drum. I'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, waiting for the right time. And then she looked up from chopping garlic and said something about how much easier life felt with me in it. I dropped the knife I was holding, pulled the ring out of my pocket, and asked her right there. No speech, no preamble, just the question that had been burning a hole in my chest. She blinked, stunned, then laughed. Are you serious? Dead serious? In the middle of pesto, best time I could think of. She said yes with garlic on her hands and tears in her eyes. I knew that moment, messy and real, would be more honest than anything a cathedral or fancy vow could offer. But of course, nothing honest ever stays untouched for long, especially when family's involved. We told the Nelsons first. They were thrilled. Mrs. Nelson wept and started researching rehearsal dinner venues before we'd even picked a date. I debated whether to tell Miriam at all. Part of me wanted to send her the wedding invitation the way she used to send letters, detached and distant. But Alyssa, ever the diplomat, insisted. She's your mother, Daniel, no matter the history. So we set up a video call. Miriam appeared on screen, her background a tidy bookshelf and some expensive-looking sculpture that screamed therapist's office or curated grief. I said the words, "We're getting married," and watched her smile freeze like a polite mask. That's wonderful news, she said, not a trace of emotion cracking the surface. Alyssa, I've heard so much about you. Alyssa smiled tightly. All good things, I hope. Miriam nodded, then added, you're very poised. It wasn't a compliment. Just an observation laced with judgment. The call ended with stiff congratulations and a vague promise to make arrangements. Alyssa sat back, exhaled and said, well, that was fun. I tried to joke. That's her version of enthusiasm. Your mom looks like she irons her cashmere sweaters, she muttered. I didn't argue. The wedding planning drove a wedge deeper than either of us expected. Alyssa's vision was clean and minimal, garden venue, jazz quartet, custom floral centerpieces with strange names. My family called it a magazine shoot and not in a complimentary way. Aunt Jane was the loudest. At a pre-wedding dinner hosted by the Nelsons, Jane took one look at the venue mock-ups and scoffed. Some people wear their wealth like perfume, hard to ignore. Alyssa didn't flinch. She just smiled, passed her the mashed potatoes and said, some people confuse confidence with arrogance. Also hard to ignore. That earned a half-joke laugh from Emily, who quickly covered her mouth with a napkin. I felt the tension radiating from both ends of the table. Later that night, I found Alyssa in the hallway staring at her reflection like she was bracing for a punch. You okay? I asked. I'm fine, she said. They don't bother me. It's not the money they resent, it's that I don't apologize for having it. She turned to me. But for the record, if Jane ever says something like that again, I'm not passing the potatoes. I'm throwing them. I chuckled. Fair. We had one of our worst arguments that week. I was trying to explain my family's friction to her while ironing my shirt and she interrupted me mid-sentence. You keep defending them, Daniel. Why? Because they're not bad people. But they're not kind either, at least not to me. They don't mean it personally. They just come from a different world, one that doesn't know how to process people like you. She raised her eyebrow. People like me? Strong, successful, intimidating. You mean female and unashamed. I threw down the iron. Don't twist my words, Alyssa. Then say better ones. We stood there in silence, both angry, both hurt. Then she softened. I don't need them to love me, Daniel, just respect our life together. That's not asking for much. And I realized she was right. I'd spent so much time trying to be the bridge between two worlds that I forgot bridges get stepped on. The wedding day came faster than expected. Everything was beautiful. The flowers bloomed on cue, the music was flawless, and Alyssa looked like she'd stepped out of a dream I didn't know I'd had. Miriam arrived late, wearing a pale green dress that looked expensive but funereal. She hugged Emily, nodded at the Nelsons, and gave Alyssa a bouquet of white lilies with a note tucked inside that read, for a new beginning. It felt more like a peace offering than a blessing. During the ceremony, she sat quietly, clapping at the right moments, smiling at the wrong ones. After the photos, while everyone drank champagne and danced under string lights, I found her sitting alone under a tree, staring at nothing. I sat down beside her, silence between us like an old familiar bruise. You pulled it off, she said finally. A wedding out of a magazine. It was Alyssa's vision, I replied. I just showed up in the right tie. She nodded, then added, she's not what I pictured for you. You mean she's not broken enough for me, I said, bitterness seeping out before I could stop it. I meant she's polished, strong. You usually keep your distance from strong women. Funny, I learned that from you. She looked away, then said quietly, I hope she doesn't leave you the way I did. She never would, I said without hesitation. Because she doesn't run from hard things, she walks into them, eyes open. And if she does, then I'll fight for her, something you never did for us. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. You think I didn't suffer, she whispered. I think you made your suffering everyone else's burden, I said. But this isn't about you. It's about a life I built without your help. She didn't answer. Just reached out and touched my hand briefly, like a flicker of a mother she once was. Then she stood, walked back toward the crowd, and disappeared into it like a guest. Later that night, as the music died down and guests started to drift away, Alyssa pulled me into a slow dance, our shoes scraping the edge of the stone path. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Eventually, she rested her head on my shoulder. I love you, Daniel, all of you, even the broken parts you think are too sharp. I kissed her forehead and whispered, you made the broken parts matter again. But as we danced under the canopy of stars, I saw Miriam standing by the garden gate, alone again. This time she looked back. Returning to the house I grew up in with my children was surreal in a way that felt both comforting and traitorous. Alyssa had stayed behind, an upcoming court appearance for one of her clients, and though we agreed this trip would be good for the kids, I knew the absence would sharpen every edge. The house looked the same from the outside. Same peeling white paint, same crooked mailbox, same brittle rosebush that had survived a dozen winters. But the inside had changed. Miriam had polished everything into gleam, new curtains, fresh paint, photos hung in strategic places like evidence of a life reassembled. She greeted us at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, hugging my children like she was desperate to make up for every moment she'd lost. She gave them little wrapped boxes, books, toys, sweets, and told stories over dinner about how I used to stick peas in my nose and hide spoons in the backyard. The kids loved it, laughed, asked for more. She cooked meals like she was auditioning for redemption. For a while, it worked. The days fell into something dangerously close to peace. I caught myself smiling over breakfast, watching her braid my daughter's hair, hearing my son ask if they could stay another week. And I wondered, maybe people do change. Maybe we were finally crawling toward something real. But peace, like always, never lasts in this family. It was close to midnight on our fourth night there. I couldn't sleep, the mattress too soft, the air too thick with memory. I went downstairs for water, barefoot and quiet, when I heard voices floating from the kitchen. I paused at the top of the stairs, then took one step at a time until the words sharpened. It was Aunt Jane. She's got that look, you know, like she's better than the rest of us. Wears it like perfume. Jane, Miriam said, tired but not angry. Don't start. I'm just saying Alyssa doesn't exactly try to blend in. High heels and Harvard, and you expect Daniel to keep up with that forever. Jane, stop. If he hears. Well, maybe you should. Maybe someone needs to say it. That woman married up, not sideways. Miriam's voice lowered. Don't bring it up, he'll get upset. That was the moment I froze, one hand on the stair rail, my pulse crashing in my ears. I was 10 again, listening to whispered decisions about my life, overhearing adults play poker with my future. I took the last few steps hard, making the floorboards creak so loudly they jumped. Jane turned first, her face morphing from smug to startled. Daniel, she said, we were just talking. I heard, I said flatly. Every word. The silence stretched too long. Miriam looked down, Jane looked annoyed. Come on, don't be dramatic, Jane said. We're family, families talk. No. You insult, I replied. You mock the woman who's raised my children, fought for me, stood by me when none of you even knew how to hold a conversation without condescension. She's cold, Jane snapped. Cold and calculating, she acts like we're beneath her. Maybe you feel beneath her because you can't imagine a woman being powerful without being cruel, I shot back. Miriam flinched. Jane stood up, pointing a finger at me like I was a teenager again. Watch it, Daniel. Don't you dare pretend she's some saint just because she's smarter than you. She gave me the family you left behind, I said, turning to Miriam now. So no, I won't let you disrespect her, not here, not anywhere. Miriam's lips trembled. I didn't mean it like that. But you said it, that's enough. The weight of the moment lingered between us. Jane rolled her eyes and muttered, God, you're sensitive, before storming out with her wineglass half full. Miriam didn't follow. She just stared at the floor like it held some answer she'd been searching for. She intimidates me, she said eventually. Alyssa, she knows who she is, I never did. So you tear her down. I didn't mean to, I worry she's too different from you from this. No, I said, my voice suddenly tight. She's exactly what I needed, because I didn't want to become this. Her shoulders sagged. You think I'm poison, don't you? I think you make people shrink when you're scared, I said. And you've been scared since Dad died, maybe before. She tried to explain. Said she only tolerated Jane's comments because she was tired of confrontation. Said she didn't realize how much it would hurt me. But her words felt like tissue paper stretched over water, thin, breaking, insubstantial. I didn't raise my voice again. I just stepped back, shook my head once, and left her standing there, surrounded by the ghosts of her choices. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the old garage with a blanket around my shoulders, next to the rusted bike Dad never got to teach me to ride. I thought about Alyssa, probably up late too, working, caring, worrying about us. I thought about how many women I'd seen try to define motherhood by guilt and gifts instead of presence. And I thought about my kids, who deserved better than half apologies and whispered poison. In the quiet, I made a decision, not the dramatic kind with ultimatums or fireworks, but a quiet retreat. I'd let the rest of the visit play out. I'd smile for my children. I'd keep the peace. But emotionally, I was done. Miriam had built herself a glass house and forgot who used to sweep up the shards. I'd spent enough years cutting myself on her edges. Not anymore. I found her in the kitchen before sunrise, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, steam rising into her face like it was trying to cleanse her of something. She didn't look up when I walked in. Just said, "Didn't sleep either." Her voice was tired, not just from the night, but from years of saying too little or too much. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter, letting the silence stretch until it was too taut to ignore. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded once and sat down at the small round table by the window, the same one where Dad used to read the paper with jam on his fingers and hum through his teeth. I took the seat across from her, not out of habit but necessity. It was time for honesty, and I couldn't deliver it while pacing like a coward. "Look," I started, voice steady, "I know we all carry wounds. I'm not here to pretend you didn't suffer. But if we're going to have any future, respect has to be the baseline. Especially for Alyssa, you can't pretend to want me in your life and then tolerate people who disrespect my wife." She blinked a few times and set her mug down like it had become too heavy. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," she said, eyes rimmed red. "Jane has always had a sharp tongue, you know that." "That's not an excuse," I shot back. "A sharp tongue without accountability is just cruelty with a costume." She winced. "She was there for me when no one else was. And I couldn't breathe after your father died. She was the only one who showed up. I owe her." I leaned in, my voice low but cutting. "You owe her what exactly? Loyalty, fine, but not at the expense of your son, not at the expense of my marriage. Defending someone who insults my wife is betrayal, whether you say the words yourself or let them be said in your house without a fight." She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she covered her face with her hands and exhaled, long and shuddering. "I was alone, Daniel, for years. I didn't know how to be what you and Emily needed. Your father was the glue, and when he was gone, I unraveled. Every part of me broke. I couldn't breathe in this house without seeing him in the curtains, in the mugs, in the damn sound of the stairs, so I left." I let the words hang there for a second, my jaw tight. "Your grief doesn't erase our childhood. We were grieving too. We needed you to stay, and instead we got letters with no return address and promises with expiration dates. You think Jane saved you? Maybe, but she made it clear I was something to endure, not love." Miriam finally looked at me then, her eyes full of a guilt that had aged like rust. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "Some days," I answered truthfully. "But it's not hate like you think. It's disappointment soaked in years of silence. It's wishing the woman who made my lunches and kissed my bruises hadn't disappeared when I needed her most." She swallowed hard. "And Alyssa, she thinks I am." "She doesn't think anything," I interrupted. "She observes, she protects. She's had to fight for every inch of space she's carved in this family, and still she's never raised her voice, never thrown a word back in anyone's face. That's not cold. That's control. That's survival. And you treat it like arrogance." "I feel like she sees right through me," she admitted. "Like I'm a failure and she knows it." "Maybe because you haven't given her any reason to believe otherwise," I said. "She didn't marry me to collect trophies. She married me because we built something out of what was broken. And she's not going to let anyone, including my mother, chisel at that." The room fell into a heavy silence again. Outside, the sky was turning orange at the edges, and the clink of the old radiator was the only sound. Finally, Miriam asked, "Have I lost you again?" I took a long sip of coffee before answering. "That's up to you now." She nodded slowly, like she already knew what I meant. "You're cutting the trip short, aren't you?" "Yeah," I said. "The kids are happy here, but they're picking up on things. They don't need to grow up in a house where love comes with fine print and backhanded comments." She didn't cry, not this time. She just sat there, shoulders hunched, mug abandoned, her gaze locked on a smudge on the tabletop. "I thought if I tried hard enough, cooked enough, bought the right things, maybe I could fix it. It's not about the food or the gifts," I said. "It's about how people feel when they're around you. And lately, Alyssa feels judged. I feel exhausted. That's not healing. That's performance." Miriam stood and walked to the window, pressing a hand against the glass like she was waiting for someone to wave back. "You're a good father," she said. "Better than you had any right to become." "I had good examples," I said. "Some I followed, some I learned from by doing the opposite." She turned, gave a weak smile and whispered, "And I paid for it, every day since." I stood up, grabbed my coffee and paused by the doorway. Then stopped making my wife pay too. And I walked away before the silence could pull me back in. Upstairs, I found my daughter still asleep, her little hand clutching the book Miriam had read to her the night before. My son stirred when I tucked the blanket tighter around him, muttering something about dinosaurs and peanut butter. I sat between their beds for a moment and stared out the window. This house had once held so much love, and so much absence. I realized I couldn't keep dragging my children into a space where both were indistinguishable. As the sun cracked through the blinds, I took a breath and began packing our things. I didn't know what kind of goodbye Miriam would offer later, or if it would come at all. But this conversation, raw and unfinished, was the most honest one we'd ever had. And it left me colder than I expected. The airport looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was just the relief dulling the edges of everything around me, or maybe coming back felt so much heavier than leaving that nothing could measure up to the weight I was carrying. The kids spotted Alyssa first. She stood by the arrivals gate with her arms folded, trying to look casual but failing miserably. She never did hide emotion well, not when it mattered. As soon as they ran toward her, her face broke open with that exact mixture of joy and ache I'd fallen in love with years ago. She bent down, gathering them into her arms like she'd been holding her breath the entire time we were gone. I watched them for a second, letting the moment anchor me. When I finally stepped forward, she looked up and our eyes locked. There wasn't a smile, not right away, just that searching look she gave when she was trying to decide if I came back whole or cracked. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she echoed softer. I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and let my hand rest on her lower back, like I needed the reassurance that we were still a unit. That night, after the kids were tucked into their beds, lost in the kind of deep sleep only a week of overstimulation can buy, Alyssa made us tea and lit the low lamp in the corner of our living room. The air felt thick with the unspoken. I sat on the couch, stretched out with a blanket over my lap while she perched on the armrest, sipping chamomile like it was her shield. "So," she finally said, "how was it?" Her voice was neutral, but her eyes weren't. I exhaled. "Where do I start?" "Where it hurts the most," she said. I looked at her, startled by how well she always cut to the core. "Jane said some things about you, about us." Miriam didn't stop her, didn't push back until I forced it. Alyssa didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. "I figured as much, and your mom," I rubbed my face. "She cooked," she smiled, she played grandma like she was auditioning for a second chance. But when it mattered, when someone twisted the knife, she just stood there. Alyssa set her mug down, folded her arms. "It's not just what they said, it's that they still think it, that's what stings." Her voice was calm, but there was a tremble beneath it that cut deeper than any shout. "I'm sorry," I said, eyes meeting hers. "Not just for what they said, but for putting you in that position, for asking you to make space for people who never really made space for you." "You didn't ask," she replied. "You hoped, that's different, but hope shouldn't cost me my dignity." "It won't again," I promised. "We're the family now, you and me. Them, my mother, Jane, the ghosts of my childhood, they're just echoes, and I'm done letting echoes run the show." Let out a breath that wasn't quite relief but wasn't resistance either. "That sounds good, but saying it isn't the same as choosing it." I stood up, crossed the room, and knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. "Then let me show you I choose you, every time. If it comes down to peace in the family or peace in our home, I choose our home." We sat like that for a while, hands clasped, forehead to forehead, until the tension cracked just enough for us to lean into each other. She kissed my cheek. "I don't need them to like me, Daniel, I just don't want them to hate me for who I am." "They don't get to define you," I said. "You've already done that with how you love us, with how you stayed when it would have been easier to walk." We stayed quiet after that, just sipping tea and letting the silence feel like healing instead of history. We talked about the future, cautiously. About whether we'd ever try visiting again, and under what terms. Alyssa didn't shut the door completely, but she made it clear there would be rules, boundaries. "No more sacrificing my dignity for their comfort," she said. "If they want in, they come correct. Otherwise, we send postcards, not plane tickets." I agreed. It was more than fair. Honestly, it was generous. Before heading to bed, we checked on the kids. Our daughter mumbled something in her sleep about grandma's pancakes, and our son was sprawled out like a starfish, one sock off, mouth open. I kissed both of them goodnight and stood in the doorway for a while. The soft glow of their nightlight flickered across their faces, and I felt something in me settle. This calm, this closeness, this deliberate choosing of one another. This was the home I'd wanted as a boy. A home where love didn't vanish when it got hard. A home where presence wasn't a luxury. I walked back to our bedroom with Alyssa's hand in mine, the memory of my mother's silence still echoing faintly in my chest. But it was smaller now, dwarfed by the sound of my children breathing deeply, by the scent of Alyssa's tea still lingering in the air, by the weight of a life I had chosen and fought to protect. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like I'd escaped the past, I felt like I'd rewritten the ending. Months passed with the quiet rhythm of routine slowly rebuilding itself around us. Lunchboxes packed before sunrise, mismatched socks retrieved from under beds, emails half-read while coffee went cold on the counter. Alyssa returned to her whirlwind of court filings and case prep, and the kids re-anchored themselves in the comfort of their own beds and bedtime stories. I found myself breathing easier, smiling without thinking about it, laughing without bracing for what might come next. But peace never settles without a cost, and somewhere in the background, the tension I'd left behind in that kitchen back home continued humming like a bad frequency just beneath the surface. Miriam called once every couple of weeks. The conversations were short, polite, and so distant they could have been scripted. She asked about the kids, what they were learning in school, what they were watching, what they were growing into, but never once asked how Alyssa was. Never once apologized again. The calls always ended with the same awkward pause and a sigh, like she wanted to say something else but didn't know how, or worse, didn't dare. Emily called more often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes with a clear agenda. She feels like you're punishing her, she said one afternoon while I was picking up groceries. She feels frozen out. She's not frozen out, I said. She's just not welcome to keep rewriting the past like it didn't bleed. Emily didn't push back right away. I could hear her hesitating, maybe walking laps around her apartment like she always did when nervous. And Jane, she asked eventually, what about her? You know she doesn't get it, never did, but mom listens to her. Still, it's like she's afraid if she stops, she'll drown in the silence. I leaned against the car door and pinched the bridge of my nose. She's hurting too, Danny. You're both carrying different kinds of silence. I'll carry grief, I said. I won't carry disrespect. It came in waves, unannounced and inconvenient. One night I found myself lying awake next to Alyssa while she read, and I whispered, what if I'm too hard on her? She didn't look up, just flipped a page and said, maybe, but your peace matters too. Not everything broken needs fixing. That line landed somewhere between comfort and conviction. She closed her book and looked at me. I know you want to be the better man, but sometimes that looks like holding the line, not opening the door. I kissed her shoulder and tried to believe it. Miriam started sending packages. Toys for the kids, sweaters, books she thought they'd like, and always tucked inside a card. Not a note, not a letter, just a card with a few lines. Grandma loves you. Sorry I can't be there more. Maybe soon. There was always something passive in the phrasing, like her absence was a weather pattern, not a decision. The kids were excited by the boxes at first, but after a while, even they stopped tearing into them with the same urgency. One evening my daughter held up a bracelet and asked, when will Grandma actually come to see me again? I didn't have an answer. That night I called Miriam. No warning, no plan, just dialed. She picked up on the second ring, surprised. Daniel, we need to talk, not about us, not about the past, about the kids, about what you want your place in their lives to be. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I want to be there, I want to know them, but I don't know how to step into the space I left behind. You don't have to step into it, I said, you just have to stop pretending it never mattered. Another pause, then, will you visit again? Not until respect is non-negotiable, not until Jane learns to shut her mouth or you learn to correct her. Her voice dropped. That's a high bar. It should be, I said, they're worth it. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table, alone with a pen and an old notebook. I started writing a letter, not to send, not yet. Just to say the things I knew I'd one day need to explain to my kids when they asked about Miriam, about my childhood, about the fractures that never quite healed. I wrote about how she used to sing while washing dishes, how she braided Emily's hair, how her laugh filled a room when she led it. I also wrote about the door closing, the years we didn't speak, things I needed that she didn't or couldn't give. And I ended it with this: she loved me, in her way, but love without presence is like music without sound. You can believe it exists, but it doesn't hold you when it's dark. I tucked the letter into the back of the notebook and slid it into the top drawer of my desk. I didn't know when I'd open it again, but I knew the day would come. Maybe when my daughter asked why I changed the subject every time Grandma came up. Maybe when my son asked why she never stayed long. Maybe when I needed to remember that forgiveness isn't always loud. It's often a quiet decision not to pass the pain forward. The backyard was humming with that kind of golden calm only late summer evenings could summon. Sprinklers clicking somewhere in the distance, kids' laughter floating up like kites, and the sun bleeding orange across the sky. I sat on the porch steps, a cold bottle of lemonade sweating in my hand, watching my son try to teach his younger sister how to throw a spiral with the same seriousness a general might use to lead an army. She kept dropping the ball, but she kept laughing too, loud, wild, unbothered, and something about that laugh struck deep, like a signal flare from the part of me I'd once thought long buried. I never laughed like that as a kid. Not after Dad died, not after Mom left. I'd become quiet, careful, busy memorizing the exits in every room I was ever placed in. But they, my kids, they were growing up in a world I helped build, not one they had to survive. I watched them and thought, this is what healing looks like when it wears sneakers and grass stains. For a long moment, I just sat there in awe of it, not as a father, but as someone who knew what the absence of this kind of joy felt like. The sun slipped lower, and something in the quiet pulled up an old memory, the last one I have of my father before everything fell apart. He was spinning a coin on the kitchen table, the late light catching its edges as it danced and wobbled. Trick is in the wrist, he'd said, grinning, like it was some ancient wisdom. I'd laughed not at the coin but at the look on his face, joyful, grounded there. When it finally fell flat with a clink, he reached across the table, pulled me into a bear hug and said, "You'll always have me, damn the man, always." That memory has chased me for years, not for what it gave me, but for what it didn't get to become. And now, watching my son clumsily toss a football and glance over to see if I was still watching, I called out, "Hey bud." He turned. Yeah, Dad. I'll always be here, no matter what. He blinked, grinned, and ran back to his sister like I just guaranteed the stars would stay in place. Maybe for him, I had. Lissa stepped out onto the porch then, barefoot, wine glass in hand, hair pulled back in that lazy twist she wore when she was half done working and half trying to forget the world outside our four walls. She sat beside me, her shoulder pressing gently against mine. They're getting so big, she murmured, and loud. That's your genes, I said. She smirked, sipped her wine, then looked out over the yard. I was thinking, she said, maybe next month we could take a trip, just us, somewhere quiet. Mountains maybe, somewhere that doesn't have cell service. That sounds like paradise, I said, as long as you promise to let the kids win at Uno once. Not a chance, they'll earn their victories like I did. I laughed, and the sound of it didn't feel foreign in my throat anymore. Alyssa glanced sideways at me. You've changed, she said softly. More settled, I nodded. Parenting woke up parts of me I didn't even know were still there, parts I buried when I was a kid. I think Dad would have been a good grandfather. She reached over, rested her hand on mine. He would have been proud, and he'd hate your coffee, I smiled. He'd hate a lot of things, but not this. My phone buzzed against the wood, a voicemail. I didn't need to check to know who it was. I let it sit, ignored it. Later, when the kids were in pajamas and brushing their teeth, I played it in the kitchen. Miriam's voice was softer than I remembered, older, heavier. I'm trying, Daniel. I want to do better. I know it's late. I know I've done damage I can't undo, but I'm still here, still hoping, still loving you the only way I know how. I just wanted you to know that. I stood there, listening to the silence that followed. I didn't delete it. But I didn't call back either. Instead, I pulled out a board game and sat cross-legged in the living room while the kids fought over which color pieces they wanted. Alyssa joined in, eyeing us all with a half smile. And I realized that healing wasn't about letting people back in just because they knocked louder. Sometimes it was about choosing who got to sit at your table and who had to stay behind the fence. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. Sometimes it's just peace from the storm. That thought settled into my chest like something I didn't know I needed to hear from myself. Miriam's voice still echoed in the room, faint and static-laced from the phone, but the sounds that mattered, the giggling, the dice rolling across the board, Alyssa's mock groan when she landed on the wrong square, those were louder. They were the sounds of a present I could live inside. A future I could believe in. Later we walked together down the street, just the four of us, the sky bruising into twilight. Our shadows stretched long in front of us, crisscrossing, merging, separating. My daughter clung to Alyssa's hand, my son skipped beside me, and I looked ahead, not behind. I didn't know what kind of relationship I'd have with Miriam 5 years from now, or if I'd have one at all. But I knew what I had now. I was raised in absence. My children will be raised in presence. You didn't repeat the cycle, Alyssa said, breaking the silence. You rewrote the story. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We kept walking forward together, whole, shadows long and unbroken. And this time, no one looked back.